Hello students, this is Professor Fernetovich here with part 3 of our Intro to Botany video lecture. This is where I left off talking about groupings and how they reflect names and how names influence groupings. So we are going to look a little bit more in depth on this. In the 1900s, the two classical kingdom system was replaced. Remember that? Animals and plants. And by the 1970s, scientists recognized 5 kingdoms. And they were animals, plants, fungi, protists, and Monera. And this is what I learned when I was growing up. Animals were multicellular, that means made of many cells. The cells are eukaryotic in nature. We'll talk more about that in the next section. When we look at plant cells, it essentially means they have a nucleus. They're modal, the animals move, and they're heterotrophic, meaning they consume food. Plants are also multicellular, eukaryotic, but they're not motile. We call that sessile, and they're autotrophic, which means they make their own food. Fungi, mostly multicellular, always eukaryotic, non-modal, and heterotrophic. So kind of a mixture of the features of animals and plants. Protists were all the leftover eukaryotes, and Monera included all prokaryotes, and those are organisms without a nucleus, and includes things like bacteria. And so down here you can see what an example of a prokaryotic cell looks like and a eukaryotic cell. And so the main difference here is that, see this blue stuff? That's DNA. It's not included inside a nucleus like a ball. And the eukaryotic cell has a nucleus, as well as all these other compartments, which are organelles. So this is what was recognized by the 1970s. But hold on, it didn't stay that way. Since the 1970s, new technology, especially regarding DNA, has made it possible to tell the genetic codes of different organisms. So we could look at what genes each type of organism has. And so we've seen that some of our early studies and early classifications were wrong. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, biologists came to realize that life was split into 3 big groups, and these big groups were above kingdom. So this was the first time that the Linnaean system really changed in terms of adding a new major level. Not just one of those intermediate levels, but we had a big shakeup here. The new largest taxoner group is called the domain. And when we look at all of life on the planet, we could lump them into domain Eukarya, domain Archaea, or domain Bacteria. And essentially what this did was to take the 5 kingdoms, take out Monera, and split it into Archaea and Bacteria. The 4 remaining kingdoms stayed in this domain Eukarya. You could see land plants are here, animals, and fungi. We also have protists in there. So Archaea and Bacteria include all of the prokaryotes that were originally in Monera, and Eukarya includes all the eukaryotes. And this is that picture just shown bigger. So eukaryotes, all these organisms here have a distinct nucleus. Archaea and bacteria don't have a distinct nucleus. You might be asking, well, what's the difference between them? Well, there are major genetic differences and also major habitat differences. Archaea tend to live in extreme habitats. Bacteria live everywhere, and they have very different types of DNA. They look fairly similar here. You know, we've got microscopic, teeny tiny organisms in Archaea and bacteria. Here are Archaea. Here, this picture is called Archaebacteria, but we would say it's Archaea. And over here is bacteria. They also differ in their cell wall composition, which has to do with their genes as well. So now we have, within Eukarya, three kingdoms that are what we call monophyletic, stemming from one common ancestor: plants, animals, and fungi. They are very distinct kingdoms. The other one, Protista, is still kind of a mishmash. In my original slide with the 5 kingdoms, it said that Protista included all the eukaryotes that weren't in plants, animals, or fungi, and that still is the case. So Protista, and sometimes I call it the garbage can kingdom, because it's just a collection of everything that's eukaryotic that doesn't fit into plant, animal, or fungi. So we see some real oddballs in there. There are single-celled organisms that are kind of like animals. They're heterotrophic. There are single-celled organisms that are autotrophic. There are some that are multicellular and kind of don't have the same organization as a plant. So Protista is kind of an odd kingdom. We are not going to go into archaea or bacteria in here. Those you can study in a different class, but they are single-celled prokaryotes. That's all you need to know for now. We are, in this class, going to focus on plants, of course. And when we look at the plant kingdom, one thing we see is that plants evolved from an ancestral green algae. So one of those protists early on developed structures that made it different from other prokaryotes. And so the first plants that evolved were called non-vascular plants. These did not have a vascular system. A vascular system is a series of tubes within an organism that carries water and nutrients around it. The mosses, little mosses that grow in the forest, liverworts and hornworts, we'll see some pictures of those later on, are non-vascular plants. They don't have the series of tubes to deliver water. Instead, they can absorb water through diffusion and osmosis across their cell walls. So they are unique and evolved early. The first vascular plants that evolved became the ferns. We see these in the forest. These do not have seeds or flowers, but they do have a vascular system. So a level of complexity that's a little above the mosses. Then plants that evolved seeds came. The conifers, which we call gymnosperms, were the first seed plants. A conifer refers to a plant with a cone. Often they have needles, so we're talking about our pine trees and stuff there. Gymnosperms is the technical term. And then flowers evolved. Flowers are the most recent evolution in plant morphology, and flowering plants are called angiosperms. These are the 4 major groups of plants: the mosses, seedless vascular plants, we would say, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. There's a handout page on Moodle that shows this. So the non-vascular plants lack specialized tissue to conduct water and other substances, and this is what a leaf of a moss looks like. It's kind of a leaf in quotation marks because it doesn't have some of the structures that a true leaf does, like the vascular system mainly. The technical name for this is a phyllid. You could see there are little cells here. They're kind of like long green bananas. And over here is a vascular plant. This is an oak leaf with a main vein, leaf veins coming off, and those are delivering water and nutrients to the leaf. So mosses have a diversity of appearances. There are many species of mosses, as well as liverworts and hornworts, but these are generally what they look like. They like to live in moist environments because they need to absorb the water from their environment. So we usually don't see them growing in deserts. The seedless vascular plants include ferns and fern-like organisms, horsetails, which look like bottle brushes, and club mosses are in this category. They have vascular systems, but don't produce seeds. Then there are the plants that have a vascular system and do produce seeds, but don't have flowers. And these are the gymnosperms. Gymnosperm means naked seed when we take apart that word in its Greek form. We've got our conifers, but there are also cycads, things like ginkgo and netophytes. So some less common plants in the gymnosperm category. Which leaves us with our most recently evolved plants, the seed plants with flowers. And when we think of plants, these might be what come to mind. We've got our black-eyed Susans, our water lilies, magnolias, and orchids shown here. They have a vascular system, they produce seeds, and they produce flowers. Flowering plants come to mind because they are the dominant group of plants on Earth today. But not all flowers are showy like an orchid. Grass flowers are really small, and you might not even notice them. You might be allergic to grass pollen, and you might notice them in that regard. But they have tiny little flowers. They flower for a short amount of time. And trees, the trees around us, all have flowers. Not the pine trees and the conifers, of course, but things like birch, even oak has flowers that are not noticeable, but they're there. But there are many flowers that are beautiful and showy, like this bird of paradise. A fun story, at HCC, when we're on campus, we have a greenhouse. The greenhouse is being cared for during the pandemic, but we had a plant that for years, I've worked at HCC for many, many years, and I've never seen this plant flower. It looks like a banana tree, a dwarf banana tree. It's about yay big, maybe 3 feet tall, broad leaves, and it's always just been hanging around. And we hoped that one day it would get bananas. We fertilized it for fruits, but nothing happened until winter of 2020. And it finally set up a stalk and a flower, and it turned out to be a bird of paradise plant. So really exciting development in the greenhouse, something that I hadn't seen in over 10 years of being in the greenhouse. Wonderful. And hopefully it will bloom again and you will be able to see it. We have lots of plants showcasing all parts of the plant diversity talked about in this presentation in the greenhouse. We have mosses, we have ferns, we have some gymnosperms actually, and we have lots of flowering plants. So we have all 4 of those categories that you can look at and see examples of in the greenhouse. Maybe you can look outside and go for a walk in nature and see if you can spot some of those too. So this ends our first video lecture, part 3, and I hope that you enjoyed it. We've got many more to come. Let's see, everything that you need is on the Moodle site. Feel free to email me if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you again and seeing you in person eventually. Thank you.